Okay. Welcome back. Thank you. So we've got the financial model subcommittee here. I wanted to give you an update on where we are in terms of the data we collected from our communities, and talk to you a little bit about the memo that was sent today, which is an initial findings and recommendations document that is intended to serve as a jumping off point for discussion, based on what we have found in our analysis, not just of what we've gotten back, but what we've looked at from other communities that even people we haven't gotten responses back from. For example, I've been digging into Belmont's, finances and so forth, and as well as the revenue model survey that the MMA did in 2020. I think the top line takeaway from what we have is that there are not a lot of trends. That when you look at these things, communities do things in subtly different ways. There are two broad strategies for revenue allocation. One is the model we follow, which is there's a certain number of shared or fixed costs that are paid for up front, and then the remainder of revenue is divided according to a formula that the community has devised. And then there are models where the budgets are separated out, and there may or may not be certain fixed costs that are allocated outside of that. But generally speaking, there is a budget for schools that does not increase beyond a set percentage every year. There's a budget for the town or the municipality that does not increase beyond a set percentage every year. And those caps are calculated in different ways in different communities. The most robust model that we came across was Arlington's model, which also has a separate separate budget for special education with a higher growth cap. And their model is predicated on a series of overrides, and how it works is they make a commitment as part of a regular override cycle where they say, these are the community priorities. This is what we're going to pay for. We are going to cap growth in these budgets at a certain percentage, and we are going to use the levy money that is raised but not expended in any given fiscal year in a reserve fund that can then be used to cover overages, so that there is no need for an emergency override or an additional amount of reserves, or a fear that the budgets aren't going to be balanced, cuts and so forth, because in the first couple of years of the override cycle, they are taxing to the full levy amount, but they're not spending it. They're putting what they don't spend in a reserve. And then that is used to cover any potential overages. And then that forms the basis of what their next cycle looks like. Either 5 or 3-year override cycles. And so those are the two models that we have seen. The other sort of trends that we tried to identify, for example, how much has your police overtime budget gone up? How much your fire overtime budget gone up? It is cyclical, and it depends on. It really depended on, in many cases, on the collective bargaining more than anything else. We were not seeing, in some communities. We had one response that I thought was great, where they said, "How much did your overtime go up?" 0, 0, 0. I said, "Well, that's great. How did you do that?" So, "Well, we pay for it out of the reserve fund." Boy, I wonder who that sounds like. The numbers don't tell the whole story, and when you look at the deeper you dig, the more you see that the comparisons are not one-to-one in these communities. I will say that we are well situated in terms of the percentage of funding that we pay out of the general fund versus we rely on for grants for the senior center. We're on the lower end, but we're also on the high end of what we provide in terms of services, particularly with the social work team that we have. So it doesn't look out of whack to us that we are funded in the 70% range from the general fund, and then grants covering the remainder because of the high level of service we provide this community. So we're not out of whack there, which is good.
That's a very helpful piece of information.
How does Soul like Arlington deal with debt service?
Debt services, so they have a separate pool of money for debt service. So that's one of those areas where there still is this
I mean, it's.
Above the
it's-
line.
Right,
Right.
they just call it something.
They call it something else. But and wherever possible, they tamp down, which I think is interesting because in your packets is the original 1995 town school partnership. And you could see what the focus is there is really about simplifying fixed costs. That's, it's a 2-page, 3-page document, and most of it is talking about going forward. These are the only fixed costs. And it's interesting to read that list because it does not look like ours. Some things are in there, some things are.
It was a long.
It was a long time ago, and it was aspiration. Special education, for example, was above the line. It's not now. So the big takeaway from the survey is that there are models that we can look at, there are models we can follow. But when we try and kind of extract lessons from the trends, we're not seeing a lot of lessons to extract. We're not out of the ordinary in many ways. I am still trying to follow up on the special education numbers in terms of placements. I still think even controlling for the issues that you brought out last time, because it looks like we're on the higher end. But I want us to really be doing it apples to apples comparison there. So I've reached out to some of the schools trying to get some additional information.
Higher end line as what?
Number of students who are in out of district placements, number of students who we are,
As opposed to percentage of budget that's spent on special education.
correct.
I mean, one of the things that would be interesting, and actually I don't remember this part of the survey, because now it's like 2 months ago, I have to go back and check. But it's just what is the process for approvals? Because in other school districts, certain things go in front of the school committee for approval within the context of special education. And we know based on the audit that this was not managed terribly well for the last couple of years. But our process also didn't include those types of approvals at that level, really, I think at any point.
Right.
But in other towns, there are significant things that actually go in front of school committee on a case by case basis to get approval. And it adds a layer of controls.
Yeah, special education.
Those are
Yes.
public hearings.
No, I don't think it's public hearings. I mean, obviously, there's a privacy question there, but so. But my understanding from speaking to one of the building leaders is that in other districts that individual has worked in, there were different controls. I'm happy to chat with you offline about this.
Yeah.
Might be interesting to consider.
So I think when it comes to the revenue sharing, so in this memo, we talk about 2 broad areas. One is revenue sharing, generally the model, and then shared services. On the model, I think the question is really about what the community wants to do. We've had internal discussions, and I think where we have come down is we're agnostic on the model, because what we really want is clarity, right? It's about what the model produces. Clarity of results and ability to project into the future. And if we can obtain better results looking at a model that behaves more like Arlington's than Lexington's, then we should do that. But both of those models can produce good results. It's just a matter of ensuring that in either case, there's clarity in terms of what costs are being shared, how they're being allocated, where do those numbers come from? How can we expect them to shift? And, what is our policy for paying for these things? How do we address these issues? And so in either case, clarity and stability is the name of the game. If we're to keep the current model, our recommendation at this point would be to try and move as many things below the line as possible. And I realize that may be counterintuitive from the initial discussions we had, but the reason why we ultimately came down with that recommendation is because when things are above the line, departments responsible for them don't feel their effects. That's true on the school side, and that's true on our side. And where that's particularly noticeable is in healthcare. We're looking now from FY26 to FY27 at a potential decrease in available revenue to the town and the schools because of growing healthcare costs. And people are going to year-over-year decrease in available revenue. And when people look at that in the abstract, I had an email from a community member basically saying, where are you hiding the revenue? I'm not hiding the revenue. The revenue is getting eaten by healthcare costs. And you just don't see. All you see is that the school budget number is going down. And you assume that the town is stealing that money. We're not stealing that money. It's going to healthcare. And you're never seeing, who neither of us are seeing in the first place. So.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd like to understand is that if you're moving things below the line, it makes sense that then people, they see where the money goes, they have sort of direct experience with that, for lack of a better term. Does that also mean presumably that the decision-making process looks different? I mean, there's a benefit to having these things sort of consolidated from an administration to other perspective. And I want to make sure that for my own clarity, that if some things are moved below the line, does that exacerbate some of the problems that we've heard before around like distributed payroll and sort of, other issues of lack of consolidation using Google apps versus Microsoft? I mean, that feels like an easy fix. And I'm kind of curious, how did we get there?
Right.
Because there's administrative and other sort of benefits to keeping it consolidated and administered.
Yes.
Together.
Yeah, so I think there's a question of how they are assessed and how they're administered, and one of the kind of overarching themes of this memo is those are separate things. Wherever possible, operations should be consolidated, but also in terms of from a financial perspective, the effects of decisions that are being made operationally should be realized in the budgets of the departments that are making.
Right.
So.
But I mean, just so I understand. The presumably healthcare costs are partially driven by the contract.
Mhm.
Okay. But not entirely. I'm just trying to parse out like how much influence do they really have if the goal is to actually have sort of the control and the impact in the same place, which I can appreciate. And so just want to pressure test for moving as many things below the line as possible. Like, are we really sort of setting that up to be successful? Or are you just creating different problems? Like 6 of one, half dozen the other. And I think I really want to understand that.
Yeah, no, Melissa can correct me if what I'm gonna say is incorrect, but with the GIC, everyone's in that, and it's something that there's no differentiation between the percentage of payment that the town makes for healthcare costs for teachers, that is for firemen, for police. So that's sort of uniform, and any changes to that have to be approved by all of them, or majority of them, and that basically means the schools. I think your question is a great question. I think from a practical perspective, it's probably not there wouldn't be separate decisions being made by the different parts of the town.
And the head count. I mean, I think that's really where you'll kind of narrow in on trying to achieve savings, is by honing in on the number of FTEs that you're growing every year. And then also how your onboarding and offboarding processes affect those numbers. And, to the extent that there could be more efficiencies in that would help shrink that. I think that's where you find some savings.
There's a perception issue that we don't pay for benefits when it's above the line, as opposed to when I hire someone, this is the full cost, not this. I'm not sure if it has a real impact on the ultimate outcome, but there's an ownership and perception issue, more than a dollar savings. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, when departments request FTEs and they submit their budget request, we automatically throw on an estimate for group health.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that kind of necessarily happens on the school side when you're adding positions or adding new programs and things like that. Because eventually it does come to roost in a higher group health number. The assessment may happen a year later.
So
Everyone's
pie is bigger from a dollar perspective, but they are
Have to cover more. Yeah.
right. So the one comment I make about these two different approaches is I wonder if the path of least resistance and building off of what we have would be easier for town meeting and the professionals. I could be completely wrong about that, but it's sort of my.
You're right, it's true.
And a question I have is how fixed the percentages are of 60-40, because I saw in some towns, the percentages were different. One had sort of a clawback. I mean, I looked at it very, very briefly. I only had like an hour.
Sorry, I know.
No,
Yeah, sorry.
Like,
but
don't.
I didn't.
so it's, it seemed like they had a separate reserve, or they had in their calculation something that reflected changes in the school population.
Right.
Right.
That's
And
our-
I don't know if you could do that in our model. It's something that has come up as school costs keep going up, but the population keeps going down. And I know that that reverses, because when I started, the school population kept going up and you didn't have the revenues to keep up with it. So I hate fixed set in stone numbers, because it doesn't give you an opportunity to deal with changes in reality.
Yep.
There's also always the reality of town meeting and what we're gonna lose, and, you know, the difficulty, and but we need to look at the whole pot. So, I'm not sure I come down in any particular place, but I personally prefer more flexibility, which doesn't mean that, you know, you're only gonna get 3% a year is any more flexible, because I don't like that. So it's more, if we kept our model, building in a mechanism that says periodically we look at how we've divided the pie to reflect, but town costs have gone up this much, and gee, the school was able to eliminate a whole school because everybody left town, and I don't expect that's gonna happen, but
Yeah, but the old town school partnership,
Yeah.
you know, had that idea of flexibility built into it. And there were certain things that, you know, if population increase, there'd be some adjustment for that. And fact is that, you know, it seems like every year there are discussions between, you know, the superintendent and the town manager to, you know, make sure that things are sort of taken care of if they're true needs. And that certainly was something that happened when the schools were having population increase. I think building in some sort of dynamic is really important, but even if you build it in, it has to be flexible with what you built in.
well,
It's just
yeah,
the reality.
things also get baked in. So I guess my concern is that we've now baked in 60-40.
No, I disagree with that, because it changed a few years ago.
So, okay, and that's really what my question is, because I haven't been tracking it. But there needs to be an ability to take a step back and say, gee, these costs have gone up this much and these haven't. Maybe we need to reshuffle it, because again, what I hear constantly is the schools get this and all the rest of us get that. And so to keep reminding people that it's looked at in a way that's clear, so they're not going through this formula that I keep putting in front of me to remember what it says.
Well, I think to me, it comes back to what Chad
Yeah,
was saying, you
right.
know, in how the documentation is simplified, because it's not simple. And clear, at least for folks in town meeting, if they bother to read it.
If they bother to read it.
So Cliff, how was it different? How was it more dynamic in the past and sort of some of the initial iterations of?
So I think that the original town school partnership document, you know, talks about sort of, this is, you know, what's the thing from Pirates of the Caribbean, you know?
I did not see
These are
any.
guidelines, right? So it has to be a living document, right? So if there are circumstances that there were some formulas that were built in, they got lost in time. You know, back when BFAC was working, everyone agreed that no one remembers.
Like the special education
Yeah.
numbers in particular were baked into the formula, but nobody knew the origin of those numbers. So,
I see.
you know, I think on the town side, we could trace everything back, but some of the things, like the enrollment, it was an enrollment number,
There was an
that
enrollment
couldn't get
number
traced
there.
back.
Right, and
So
then
it-
I just remember there was a formula. And then there were all of these ad hoc, it seemed, year by year adjustments to it. And I would get a piece of paper like this if I asked, Melissa, and it was just a tiny print and lots of little numbers. And then, gee, the schools can't afford, so we're going to give them more money for help towards their health care, because this was the period of time when the population was growing and the dollars weren't.
And the way things were defined has switched over time. So you have, the original document talks about 2/3, 1/3. But it doesn't say who got what. And I swear to God,
Even the
no one
revenues.
remembers. Even the people who worked on it could not, way back when, because I talked to one of them, couldn't remember. Couldn't remember how they
Where the
got that.
50/50 came from. They couldn't, that was nothing that kind of where that came, so, I mean, I think that, it's really about. Because in looking for an old MOU for the building services, I came across memos where they were talking about things about, well, Quinn now is not covered in the same manner as the state is, and now this money is coming in this way. And how are we going to reflect that in the formula? And there was like a debate back and forth about, when we were getting money from the state for Quinn and how that was going to get filtered through the formula.
Quinn,
I-
the audience, it's education benefits for the police.
I think what's more important, not more important, really important. And certainly one of the things that BFAC recommended, it's one of the things that Lexington does, is our town school partnership meetings need to be much more robust than they are. They are way too scripted, way too short. It's frustrating. And there needs to be, it would be good. I'd love to see periodic sit downs with the select board and the school committee and, some folks from advisory, and just going over some of these things so that things don't reach a point where it's a tectonic shift. Things are more gradual, but that requires people to be willing to sit down and review and have the data. It comes back to the earlier discussion. Without that data comes up, the ability to actually look at things and analyze it, there's a lack of shared understanding, and it's a problem.
Right. Where I left, which was right around COVID, just before we stopped meeting in person because of COVID, we were talking with you, Melissa, about being able to find what I think is now your analyst to beef up yours. And we're hoping to do the same thing on the school side, because the administrative downsizing, that seems to be a regular occurrence because we're not putting enough in the schools. I was in administration and nonprofits, and we used to have to say to our donors, if you like our services, it's because we're doing a good job managing them, which means we need to have a little bit of money in the management side and the administration side. So I don't know if there are any positions. I mean, you lost everyone at the top, but I don't know what fills in underneath on the school side and how that lack of data, it's not just, gee, what do they need, but on a recurring basis, what are we getting?
Well, I would say that, although there is no data analyst in the school department right now in the district, both Susan, Karen, some of the other two senior deputies left, but they had this uncanny ability to bring 20 tables of data to school committee meetings on a regular basis. So it's not like it's hidden, and it's not like it's so very difficult to get that it's not available. So what I'm looking forward to answers to these RSC questions that we sent is shouldn't be too big of a surprise, because a lot of the data you get in DESI and the details of profiling, we know the numbers. I mean, it's not like you need a full-time person cranking 40 hours a week on it to do it.
And how long is Karen here, Dr. Smucker?
We are going to be meeting on Friday mornings, a special another school committee meeting to offer her a contract for the next entire year.
Well, that
Is she gonna do it? Is she open to it?
Well, we're meeting to it. Well, here's the thing,
I know
She's
you want
obviously,
her, but she-
no,
she
she's
took her
open,
vindicated.
she's obviously open to it
Okay.
because school committees don't have statutory control over hiring of a OSS person. That's the superintendent's prerogative. So all they need is all you can really do on the school committee is approve it.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Can
that's
ask
good.
questions.
That's what-
Not even discussion really.
He said, I'm gone,
Yeah.
which is scary.
No, Bella had told me that she was gonna be continuing working with Karen to see if she
So-
could squeeze a year out. It would be good for stability reasons, very good for stability reasons.
Yeah.
So I have some questions about the revenue sharing, and apologies, because, I was working until I got here, so.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
I didn't get a chance to go through this in more detail. I will, and I'll probably have follow-up
Right,
questions, but.
this is the opening conversation.
Right.
Well,
So I want to make sure that I understand. So currently, I think sort of year over year, the school budget, sort of the overall budget sort of increases somewhere in like the 4.7%, right? So if you were to take a more of a percentage-based approach, I assume that you're looking at that as an order of magnitude based on sort of the historic thing. And that if you took this sort of percentage increase approach, moving all these things below the line, so you're basically recasting what ends up with the schools. Before you think about the increase, you'd have to actually reallocate all of the costs and then take another look. This year was what, 141 million roughly of the budget. But if you were to move a bunch of things below the line, that increases, to whatever it increases to, and then that's the new baseline on which you would do the 4.5 or whatever increase. Okay. And I'm curious what people's thoughts are on sort of the fixed percentage increase versus the other approach. I mean, it feels very predictable and something that the schools can manage to and that the town can manage to. But I haven't run numbers year over year to understand, variability and what it really looks like and pragmatically. So for people, who've been doing this for a long time, everybody else in the room except me, I'm curious what the implications of this are. Is that sort of going to be a viable percentage for both on the town side and the school side to viably
When I
manage to?
looked at those percentages, I didn't understand where they came from because we always talk about our budget only grows 2.5% to 3% unless we have an override. It's the tax base,
No, it's just that the levy
the levy.
only grows 2.5%.
Yeah.
The total revenue, you've got other sources of revenue and that grows too. So
That's right.
when you look at the general account revenue number, it's growing by more than 3%.
Okay.
But so I think it's, Charlie actually ran these numbers, Charlie Young ran these numbers, and they're in your packet now under what document, the budget growth cap retroactive projection.
Oh,
So if you go back in there, you can see if we were running the Arlington model, from FY 23 to FY 25, you can see where our growth would be, the delta from the approved budget with no override and the delta from the approved budget with the override that we passed. And
Can you share it up there?
yeah, I can cast it.
so this is the one that you emailed.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I opened it and saw it existed. That was about.
Yeah,
all
I
the
just
time
don't see, I don't see a file
Okay,
that
let me-
has budget growth.
Yeah, I think some of the things that happen over the course of the 3-year override cycle are things that, there's always going to be a change in what you're assuming versus what's actually happening. And so, we've seen things where there's been an assumption of new growth and that may or may not materialize at the time frame that you think it's going to happen. There was an assumption in this last override cycle around group health that far exceeded what we had, originally estimated for group health. And that continues to be kind of where our pressure area is. Then there's also, on the expense side, we had police and fire, JLMC, that kind of is a factor in our collective bargaining estimates and things like that. And then on the school side, I'm sure that there's programming that wasn't anticipated 3 years ago that is now kind of existing in the schools that,
Right.
these are the kinds of things that you try the best that you can to predict what you're going to need for a 3-year cycle, but it usually, there's a lot of movement that happens between that.
Yeah, so the other thing with the Arlington model, you've got that 4.5% plus their overrides. They are essentially locked into overrides. And
Right.
we might be de facto getting there, but they basically have a community that is now used to it. Whereas for
Business
us.
community also used to.
No, because.
I mean, I'm just
No.
saying that, like,
I'm
I've only been back here for 6 years.
I
but
was
it's-
saying
but
they're
it's,
just when it started. There used to
Well,
be-
okay, so I don't know what happened
Kicking
before.
and screaming, we have to do it. And again, what I keep bringing up is what I keep hearing is the division now, because so much of the overrides has been toward the school side. And as I get more involved with senior services, for example, I'm very much all the time hearing. So when you tell me this is why we only give 70%, it gives me something to respond to if we're trying to be rational about it. What did BFAC say? They suggested regular overrides, if I remember correctly.
So it was certainly in there as something to look at.
They were encouraging new growth as a way to avoid override.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's hard to encourage
But, you know,
growth when it's not.
I think, look, there's some merit if you can train, you know, the population to accept that approach. I don't know that
I don't know.
Brookline would ever sort of like get there. Just-
I mean, that aside from that, philosophically, I think it's, I don't know.
Well, the
You're
debt
just like,
exclusions also are a factor.
Right.
in
You-
this.
you
Yes,
also-
right.
You'd also have to train them to not keep adding things, because a lot of where we are, you know, we're now still talking about an outdoor swimming pool. And the example that PW brought of how, guess what, we're not paying for maintaining the canopy and measuring the trees and everything else, because everyone's doing replacement. They're not giving us fees. So, you know, if you're gonna say this is fixed, how we're gonna do it, I wonder how many people in Arlington are always asking for new things. I don't know how they function. I have no idea.
So they have a very active advisory committee there, like very. And
It's one that people listen to.
believe it or not, but you know, again, because there's the community is socialized on this process of if the override is developed around base community priorities, and they say, we listen to the community wants X, here's how we're funding it, and here is what we're gonna do, and because then they don't, because it prevents shocks to the system, it prevents,
Right.
except for true like black swan events like COVID, you have a system that buffers the regular operating budget from, oh my gosh, we're $8 million in the hole this year, what are we gonna do about it? The community values that consistency and is willing to vote regularly to avoid situations where they're cutting services. That's kind of the trade-off that they've made, is that they say, we're honest brokers, we're not gonna be coming back to you in the absence of something terrible and saying, well, sorry, we had to cut school services this year because we have projections that are based on this override, and we use because we phase it in, we have that buffer that we then use to protect.
Can you elaborate more on how they phase it in? You said they don't spend for the first 2 years.
So, yeah, what we do, what we have done in the past, we have a 3-year, we call it a 3-year override, and we don't tax to the new, so you can't.
We incrementally raise the levy.
The incremental raise the levy. So what appears on your ballot, when you vote for an override, is do you authorize, last time it said, do you authorize Brookline to increase the levy by roughly $12 million? And that's it. In reality, we didn't raise the levy by $12 million on day one. We raised it by around $5 million. And then the next year, we added another $3 million on, but the next year we added another $3 million. So that we did not tax to the maximum that we could have. The voters authorized us to. That was the deal that we made from the voters. We said, we will phase this in so that it doesn't, cause a shock to your tax bill. Arlington says, we're gonna raise your taxes $12 million. They don't pass $12 million raise, they pass it smaller.
They're also smaller population.
They're
Right.
roughly our size.
Are they in?
Yeah, a little smaller, but not much, 57,000.
I see.
They pass, say, a $5 million override. They tax immediately to the levy limit. They say, all right, we're going to add $5 million. However, budget is still only going to go up by a certain percent. So everything that we collect above that percentage does not go into the operating budget. It goes into an override reserve. And then that money sits there, and in the event that the projections don't play out the way they thought they would, they have that money on hand for the first few years of the override so that they can spend it covering those costs. And by the time another override cycle comes around, they can say, here's how we spend it, here's where we were off, here's what we have left over. As a result, the new override number is X.
I see. And
So
so in-
every 3 years. Is that-
So they've done them in 3-year cycles and they've done them in 5-year cycles. Right now, they seem to be on a 3-year.
They've got a lot more commercial.
Yes.
Yes,
They have a lot more land.
They do.
yes.
So if their original sort of capped at, I don't know, whatever, they do it at 4 or 5% growth, takes community input for all incremental asks, including the wish list, the wants.
Yeah.
So that is what the actual budget is based out of.
Yeah.
For a cap, 4 to 5% or whatever it is. And then the override is only just for emergency funds essentially, or
No,
that doesn't,
it helps the operating budget, but
I see.
and ultimately.
but it doesn't use all of it.
It doesn't use all of it in the first couple of years.
I see.
Eventually, they wind up using 100% of it.
Got it. That makes
Towards the
sense.
operating budget, but then they have that reserve of one-time money that's available to basically keep them solvent in the event that, healthcare costs go up by 12% as opposed to 7%.
Got it.
Now, there's no reason why we couldn't do something like that here. It should be a change in the way we do business. Then
Yeah.
we wouldn't have to shift away from the Lexington model.
It town meeting, Arlington town meeting can't sort of say, gee, I know we have it in this reserve, but let's use it.
They could, but they don't.
That's also, a lot of what we
So
get a
let's
lot of
agree.
pressure from when we're in collective bargaining is unused levy capacity.
Yeah.
That we have to say, this is for year 2 of the override. This is not available for, spending on other things.
Yes. But
Why
that's,
do you have
with our town
reserves?
meeting, it's a little bit risky.
But I think that's true,
You'd think it would be true everywhere, but
No, right, it's riskier, and it's more risky in some places than others, but it's a risk here. And we've seen an increase in town meetings' willingness to make operational decisions. So you can see Charlie calculated this out just for the town side. We haven't run the schools yet. And you can see it's not that different. That by the 3rd year, yes, you're looking at roughly $1 million delta. But again, you're thinking about, the override that passed was the override that was based on our current model. And that had we operated differently, we probably would have structured it differently. Also, if we had taxed to the levy limit to begin with, as opposed to what we did, phase it in, that surplus or that deficit after override would have been covered. Because we would have had enough money in the reserves to cover that 1.6 million.
and you earn,
I was gonna say,
Right.
you're also earning on it, so it's
Right.
not.
Right.
Right.
But this is, the sort of cap model with a current distribution of what's above the line is still above the line.
Correct,
Right.
yes.
Because I think the wild card is like, I don't have a understanding, you probably know this off the top of your head, but like of town employees, what percentage are school, for example? And therefore, what percentage of benefits and healthcare costs, all those things are informed by the school? Is it 60%?
It's a little less.
Is it? Okay.
So the schools would see a net benefit currently
Yeah.
if we shift the healthcare costs below 1.
Yep. I mean, I'd love to look at those numbers. I mean, before we make a decision on that, I think we need to take a look at like, what would that have looked like over the last X number of years? Obviously, we don't have kind of a budget forecast right now. What does that look
So
like in
you,
the
you
future?
want essentially this, looking back if the healthcare costs were.
Yeah, healthcare and other things. I mean, I think the proposal was move as much as we can below the line, and then I think there's a question about administration. It would be centrally administrated or operated, but there's like I like the idea of aligning accountability with responsibility philosophically. I think there's just a question of what does that look like? And then I think there's a question I have for the schools around just your perspective on whether you think that works better or not. I think there are pros and cons.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, and this feeds nicely into kind of the second half of the memo, which talks about shared services. Again, there are 2 fundamental ways of handling shared services. well, three actually, but I think that I don't want to spend too much time on the third. The third way is that you just have two separate power centers and you do it that way, which seems to me in almost all circumstances, but not all of them to be unnecessary. There's no reason why we need redundancies in a lot of these departments. But that said, there are some where we do. For example, I think, we talked to human resources. There are certain human resources functions that are better suited to live on the school side and should stay on the school side. That said, that's not true for the entirety of human resources. Similarly with finance, there are a number of functions that we de facto do already, that on the town side that we already do, that are just not covered by anything more than a handshake agreement. And that leads to stressors, right? Like one of the only area right now in finance where there are different employees is payroll. And that's because there are two different payroll systems. And it doesn't make, talking about what can be done in the short term, we're not going to standardize payroll overnight. We're not going to standardize payroll in time for May, but we should make a commitment to standardize payroll. It's ludicrous that we have three different payroll systems. And that's those are the kinds of things where we got to figure that out. But the other two ways you can handle it are, you can have a jointly administered function. You can have a function similar to Belmont's model for public buildings, which is above the line. There is a public buildings management committee that is run by the town manager and the superintendent. They're the only two members of this committee, and the public buildings commissioner reports to that committee. And so nothing in public buildings can get done without both of those people, the town manager and the superintendent, signing off on it. And then that is just taken off the top. That is funded before any revenue goes through any split, and it is handled that way. The other way it's handled is the way that we handle it, and Wellesley handles it with public buildings, which is the department. The function rests on one side of the line, and the other side of the line that uses the services is assessed for. And that assessment model needs to be as clear as possible. On the side of the provider, what are you providing? How are you providing it? Who are you using to provide that? What is the expectation for accountability? Who you go to in the event that the relationship breaks down. And then on the other side of it, who's paying for it, there has to be clarity on what that is and how it's calculated.
I mean, in the first model though, where you said the superintendent was at Belmont.
Yeah.
Where the superintendent and the head of the building, the administration, whatever, makes a joint decision. I mean, what happens there if you have a conflict and a disagreement?
I mean, that's the problem, is that it can't break down there. And then there's actually less opportunity, because then it becomes immediately just a political problem. Because you then have, in an ideal world, because those are both appointed officials, like, the superintendent and I don't tend to fight about those things, but it could happen. And certainly we've resolved fights among staff when that happens, but it's not that doesn't rise to our level. After that point, it becomes a political problem, and then you have to have a structure in place to handle that, which in our case we do. It's down to a partnership. It's just its function is degraded.
But not only that, like this past year was, let's say that we didn't work. I mean, in the issues historically, we haven't been there, so don't take offense.
Can you elaborate
Not
on
at all.
it?
So this year, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so historically, the issue with building maintenance has been that the school committee has not authorized enough budget authority yet for them to essentially be assessed. And as a result, 4 or 5 years ago, there's $20 million deferred maintenance, or more than that. And this year, there was a budget put forth and they approved it, and then they came back and they said, well, we're going to cut it by $675,000. And that was a big problem. And so, I don't know how that would have bubbled up in a place like Belmont if the school committee told the superintendent, go in there and cut $675,000. Or I don't know how that works. If you're suggesting that the other way is for town to essentially say, here's what needs to happen to maintain these buildings, and these are town buildings, the town owns the buildings, the school uses them, but the town owns them. This is what is needed to maintain them. And that is an investment that pays off over time. And the school committee can't cut that. Well, to me, that's sort of, we need to try that model out, because the other way, there's a history of it not working. And, it just needs to change.
I mean, there's an incentive disparity here, right? So like, I mean, I listen to a lot of budget, budget related school committee meetings. At the end of the day, the focus was on delivering educational services to children, students in the classroom. And so if everything else is secondary, then it is understandable, I think, given the focus of the schools, that those are things, the building pieces are on the table to be cut, just like the central admin conversation that was referenced earlier by Sergio. So I think if the concern is to prevent that from happening, then it does not make sense. Then it makes sense to structure that differently.
Yeah. Especially
because at the end of the day, I probably would have made the same decision, right?
Yeah, especially the town has spent $500 million in the last 4 or 5 years to put new.
And the schools aren't happy when the maintenance doesn't happen.
Right.
So they don't want to fund it, but hey, my ceiling is leaking becomes an issue for them.
I think it's a difficult, it's a difficult decision question where there's a lot of, other difficult decisions that the school made. And I think the question is like, going back to like moving everything below the line you can, what is can? and I think we should discuss like, what are the objectives that we're trying to accomplish here? And if it's this sort of, control and accountability with some exceptions, and if because these are town buildings, I could see an argument where that model shifts to be more on the town side.
The other
That decision
thing is that the cost of maintaining these new buildings is much higher because they're new systems and we don't have in-house. And I've been told by some people barely exists because they're so new, the capability of taking care of this.
Yeah.
So the more you let them go,
That feels very
it's
counterintuitive though.
like
They're
it's
new
like
buildings, so they're more expensive to maintain.
the new HVAC systems
So
require.
the systems are more complex.
Yeah.
I see.
Yes, and, the town has a very hard time hiring, trained technicians.
I
as
see.
it
We're just
is.
not staffed currently for those
Right.
types of.
Right, so we
Well,
hire
not having
outside.
enough staff and putting in systems that are so complex that there are very few people who know how to manage it.
And we're.
Even on the electrical side,
Yeah.
it's turning on lights for rooms and setting things. There are very few people in town that can even tell the school this is how you operate it.
And it's very
Interesting.
hard to recruit because we can't compete
Yeah, we
with
can't.
private salaries or anything else. I mean, if you think sanitation was difficult, this is.
And it also gets worse enough when you build new buildings within a year, you have requests from the building leaders and or the town maintenance people to redo the work. Like repaint the hallways because the kind of paint they put in was not, it's not stuff free. Or the floor tiles were covered in a certain way that is now causing a lot of issues, or there's just this long list.
Yeah.
Which I'm beginning to learn about now that I have capital, so I'm saying.
Right. Well, this is interesting because it feels like some of the decision making
I didn't get. the-
earlier in the funnel.
That comes
Maybe
back to
not,
the
but-
I mean, it's true,
building,
it's true. I mean,
building
Right.
design and.
I mean, scuff-free school, like, I mean,
Thank you.
I have like vinyl wallpaper in my house because of my children.
you would think of cleaning
Not even
windows at 22 tab, okay,
Right.
that are basically uncleanable. Okay, so
Yeah.
there's lots of these things happening.
Yeah.
And they all need to be maintained. And, I'm obviously not in front as much as peers on the PFAS side, maybe yes, but not in the actual construction side of it. And I'm just like, like quivering about, like, seriously, what are we building ourselves into on Pierce? Because we're not even out of the woods with Driscoll yet, as a new building that now needs maintenance.
Right.
Noise.
But I mean, are we
this is
pressure
just like-
testing the decisions that were made in Pierce? Like somebody should be doing.
So.
Well-
That's shocking.
So the process by which
I'm trying to
buildings
get
get
some control.
built is,
It is
get your head
another-
around.
yeah,
And
another-
particularly when you're using state money. But you must be talking to Carol a lot by now, right? If you're head of
Carol Levin.
capital,
Carol.
Carol Levin, you should. You really, yeah.
So to get back to this, I like what's in that first paragraph of what should be required, that it be laid out. That this is what we're gonna do. I don't know if that means agreeing the projects. So that the schools don't feel like it's all up to Charlie what gets fixed, but there's some input as to their priorities.
Right.
But once
Okay.
they're agreed on and there's a dollar amount, that dollar amount is fixed in stone. Like the healthcare costs that we don't like, but we don't have to pay for.
And that's where I think that's where our recommendation is really strongest, is that town school partnership needs to be rejuvenated as the state where these things are hammered out, and it needs to happen. Since I've been here, I feel like a broken record, I've been hammering into this, there are shared services in this community that do not have MOUs. They don't, we can't even find the building department. Neither of the schools can find it. It was 1993, we don't know where it is. So that's bad. The rec one dates to 95, the IT one dates to 2002. Segal, bless her heart, before she left, managed to get a public health one done. That's our most recent one. And then some we just don't have. And so we are left, both of us, both the town and the schools are left at a disservice because on our end, right, the schools can say, well, we're not satisfied with the level of service we're receiving. You heard it from Susan. She's frustrated. She feels like I'm not being listened to. My needs aren't being met. And I feel her on that. If we're providing a service to the schools, then we need to be responsive to the superintendent who needs that service. So I'm very committed to making sure that happens. At the same time, right, I also think there's a value in the IT team, for example, saying, no, not everyone gets a license. It doesn't happen on the town side, doesn't happen on the school side. And you just have to listen.
Doesn't happen in for-profit businesses that I worked in for almost 30 years. Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot to be gained on both sides from us setting clear expectations and then having enforceable documents where if there is a breakdown in relations, school committee can go to the select board and say, hey, you signed this and you're not doing this. You guys start doing it. And by the same token, when the budget season comes around, the select board can go to the school committee and say, this is your number, and of which you must pay this amount for the services that are being rendered to you, because the services are being rendered whether you pay for them or not.
And do other towns utilize this sort of MOU structure
Yes.
for disputes and sort of SLAs or whatever?
Yeah. And I mean, to varying degrees, it's a lot of communities are in the position we're in, but they're also moving in the right direction. I was talking to the city manager of Watertown about public buildings, where he said, we had this conversation and, public buildings was kind of more on the Belmont side of things, just about the line. There was this thing, it said, the problem was the public buildings manager was being paid on the school side of the budget. And there was a lockout happening. And so I took that position and I put it in my office. I said, here on out, this is how it's gonna go. We're gonna have clear responsibilities for the schools, but this position is staying on the city side of the budget. So public buildings. And so that, they're moving in that direction of, clarifying roles and responsibilities so that everyone knows what it is they're supposed to be doing and what's being charged for.
And so in this memo that you shared around shared services, for legal services, it says except collective bargaining. But what about special education? That's also.
I think it's worth having that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, but I don't know the level of satisfaction the school committee has for their special education council at this point. I know that service did used to be handled in-house. That was Jocelyn Murphy did it. So we have people in the community who have done that work in the past.
I wrote back to several of my colleagues on the school committee about Joe's proposal.
Uh-huh.
And I got some kickback right away, and it needs some more conversations.
Yeah, I think that's,
What could be done. And, you know, I mean, Joe is pretty, sort of aggressive about saying we could probably take over about everything.
right.
I'm not sure that all of it, the few that I could talk to in the school committee without violating OML, were a little more concerned. There were some things that you really need special outside folks for, and other things that maybe workable.
I also think, it's just, on my end, I'm more than willing to, think about what's possible. But I
I
also
think the
think,
meeting should be had. I think that shared services model for legal counsel should be looked at. for
Yeah.
sure.
It has to go as a win-win, and the only time I saw new experienced legal counsel, he does come on very, very strong.
Mhm.
And school committee naturally wants to keep its own prerogatives, so somebody has to
Right.
facilitate the conversation. You know, so that it doesn't, so that people don't turn off before they hear the proposal.
right. And I think that's why a tiered approach is the right way to do it. Let's start with the stuff that his office is already doing. Susan Harris is already devoting, I would
Oh,
say.
yeah, we meet with her.
Yeah.
Or,
So for things like that, right? Similarly for, things like IT, we've got to, I don't want to force everyone overnight onto a new system. I don't want to create a situation where it's being framed as a loss of control. I want it to be framed more as, doesn't make a lot of sense when you're in a situation where your help desk supervisor is getting paid less than your help desk employees. And those things are out of whack, and it's one system at the end of the day, right? So when we talk about cybersecurity, it makes a huge amount of sense for Fung to be the point person on that work and for her office to be managing that, so that we don't wind up with a ransomware attack that takes down the whole system. So that should be, the IT team should be unified, but the service they provide to the schools needs to be clarified, and the reporting structure needs to be clarified, so that the schools don't feel like their concerns are not being listened to, or that they're being, or that they're somehow not, an integral part of the team. So that's how it's got to be structured, as you said, kind of model.
So Chaz, there are a few other things that did come up as potential sort of areas of consolidation with the schools, like school nurses.
Yep.
And some other things, probably more on the margins, but I don't know if this contemplates some of this.
So I think public health looked into the nursing issue. We have one town nurse right now, and that's just not enough capacity on our end. Nor did we think at the time that we were thinking through it that bringing those nurses under the ambit of public health generally made sense, given that some of what they do is obviously germane to public health, like epidemiology and, some of the broader, just wellness programming and so forth,
Yeah.
like the day-to-day operations of public health, of public school nursing versus public health nursing, in our office are distinct enough that it's one of those models where we feel like the nurses are where they need to be. Right?
Okay, got it. All right, so you did look at all those things that were suggested in the presentation.
Yeah.
That was the one that was, I could remember off the top of my head, I know. Payroll, legal services, IT, I remember those.
Yeah, and DPH, right, DPH has the most recent version of an agreement, a formal agreement with the schools.
I see.
So they have a pretty good understanding of where the roles are. For example, when we talk about the schools do a youth risk assessment for kids in middle school and high school about, drug use, sexual behavior, all that stuff. And the health department helps with that process, utilizes that data, is able to then provide feedback and support. That one of the things that, we do kind of in conjunction. And so that's now memorialized, because previously there were devices that the use of that material. But now that that's clear, I have those issues.
Got it. And Cliff, you're part of the town school partnership group.
So I'm on the advisory committee. I'm the chair of the schools subcommittee. And so the town school partnership has two people from the select board, two people from the school committee, two people from advisory, so it's the chair of the advisory committee and generally the chair of the school subcommittee. And on the schools, it's generally the chair of the school committee and the chair of the finance subcommittee.
And they're all in variety.
Got it. Okay.
So I think for the next time the subcommittee meets, which I cannot remember when that is.
We were gonna schedule it now.
Oh, okay, great. I would love to say, I mean, if we could look at that sort of multi-year, going back the last 3 or 5 years on the sort of, if we were to change the split.
Mhm.
If we were to do that sort of regular 5%, what that would look like. I know we've put 5 folders on that. That was helpful. But this, shifting all these recommendations you had to be below the line, like what would that actually do to the school budget? Relative to sort of what they got and how they were operating over the last 5 years.
Okay,
I think that would be helpful.
we can pull that together. The next meeting of the broader group is 2 weeks from now. Would it make sense for us to try and tack on a meeting after that? Yeah, Tuesday.
That one's 4:30 to 6.
Yeah, I said 4 earlier, but it's actually 4:30.
Yeah, so that would mean we'll be here through 7.
It's fine for me. I'm gonna be on Pacific.
What's that?
I'm gonna be on the West Coast.
Oh,
You're not gonna be here, Josie, right?
yeah, different times. Vacation times.
Oh, that sounds lovely. I'm gonna be at a
Family
conference
times.
where-
Doesn't happen though.
Would it be better to pick a different day then? Or is everybody
we can-
going to be off somewhere or something?
We can, why don't we try and, we'll work on scheduling, if he's got.
Yeah, we're-
Why don't we send an email around with
Yeah,
all
that's fine.
options, what they
Yeah, a couple
call it.
items. would be good.
All right, great.
But
Thank you.
in the interim, I wanted to present the memo, but there's a lot of reading material.
Yeah, yeah.
As you read through it and you have questions, let us know.
Yeah.
And start giving you answers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that worked out. Charlie, were you in the meeting?
Yes, can do. Thank you.
You?